there are times we need a warrior spirit just to roll up our sleeves and march into life and deal with the challenges that naturally arise in everyday life as a form of spiritual weight training.
Hello and welcome to the James Granstrom podcast, Super Soul Model series, where I help people tune and tap in to their natural state of well-being. This week's guest is a best-selling author of 18 books. His first book, Way of the Peaceful Warrior, was released as a movie back in 2006. And he's also been a former world champion athlete, Stanford University gymnastic coach, martial artist, and professor at Oberlin College. And his latest book, which was released in 2022, Peaceful Heart, Warrior Spirit, is this week's guest, Dan Millman. Welcome to the show, Dan.
Thank you, James.
So, Dan, for those who may not know about your work or may not know about The Way of the Peaceful Warrior, which is probably your most famous book, which started this whole process going, tell us about your journey from being an athlete, a world-class athlete, into now being a spiritual teacher. You know, how did that all evolve and what got you into writing in the first place?
Well, it's easy to reverse engineer or to look back. We can understand life looking backwards, but we have to live it forward. So taking a retrospective, I never ever would have guessed that as a 10-year-old discovering an old trampoline at a summer camp and loving jumping up and down and trying new tricks would lead to scholarship to college, world championship, and all that followed. I think in my case, it was a process of disillusion in the positive sense of freeing from illusion. I noticed this made me happy for a little while, but then it wasn't that satisfying. I moved on. And then that, and I kept searching. And I guess when I shattered my right thigh bone in about 40 pieces in a motorcycle crash, as I write about in the book and is shown in the film, even though I didn't drive that recklessly, nor was my sex life quite as active as depicted.
Right, okay.
Nonetheless, at that point, it shook me up. I started asking bigger questions. I recognized my own mortality because, as we know, when we're in our 20s, we think we're bulletproof and we know everything. And so it was a humbling process. Some life lessons in one fell swoop, and I began to explore, what is this inner world? What am I here for? And asking bigger questions about my purpose. And that led to a search that I write about, as you mentioned, that culminating book, Peaceful Heart, Warrior Spirit. It's the true story behind the story of Way of the Peaceful Warrior.
Right.
And the 20-year spiritual search with 4 very radically different mentors. So many people have read my book or seen the movie and think, oh, I learned a lot from this old service station attendant. And then I started teaching, but it was a much longer process of preparation.
So, you know, many people, struggle finding their purpose and direction. And how did you find your purpose and direction? Was that just something that came out as a result of having that introspection? How did that evolve for you? Because most people are struggling with finding that purpose and direction. So how would you help them? How does your story, particularly the Peaceful Warrior, how does that sort of, give us a guideline about how to look within and find our purpose? Because, a lot of people find that tough.
Well, in my own case, many times we gain wisdom by making mistakes, and I made many mistakes. I really hadn't a clue about my purpose or direction. I was a psychology major in college. It was almost serendipity. There was nothing else really that interested me, but I didn't pursue that academically beyond my college years, and I had no idea. I sold life insurance for 3 months. I was going to do flying trapeze in the circus, but the traveling lifestyle didn't work. I was married very young, and we had a baby on the way, so that wasn't going to work. And then I just fell into this coaching job at Stanford, which reflected my background and my skills. So in my own case, there's no trail of breadcrumbs. I can't say from my experience I learned this, but in the Peaceful Warrior movie that you mentioned, there's a scene in which my character, Dan, follows Socrates, the old gas station attendant played by Nick Nolte, up this big hill. And at the top, Dan has this sort of revelation. And he says, Socrates, I just realized It's not the destination that makes us happy, it's the journey. Well, there's a certain wisdom in that because most of our lives are spent on the journey, not just reaching one destination after
So
another.
true. So true.
But without a destination in mind, there is no journey. We just wander around. So I believe we're hardwired goal seekers, human beings. I would even define success as making progress toward a meaningful goal. To
Yeah.
me, that is success, not just reaching the top of the mountain. And I define every step of the way as a success, every bit of progress we make, because we cannot control the outcomes in our lives. I've learned that. But we can control our efforts, and by making a good effort over time.
So meaning action. So action along the way is going to give us that feeling of purpose if it's meaningful. Is that
Well, yes, and if we look at our lives, what has brought us to this present moment is what we've done over time, not just what we've thought or whether we had positive thoughts or negative thoughts, not just what we felt. Somebody came up to me after a talk I gave once and said, Dan, I feel so inspired. I said, don't worry, it'll pass.
yeah, it's so true, isn't it? So
But
true.
inspiration comes and goes. Motivation waxes and wanes. So yes, there is, in this approach to living I teach, and I call the Peaceful Warrior's Way, it's focused on what we do. Barbara Rasp, a writer, once said, the lesson is simple, the student is complicated. And to simplify our life, we can focus on what we need to do in each moment in line with our goals, rather than how can I change my thoughts and how can I fix my emotions so I can live wisely and well. As it turns out, we have less control over our thoughts that arise in our field of awareness moment to moment. We have less control over the weather that passes, the emotions that pass through us, like changing weather. They come and go and change all the time. But we can spend a lot of time with techniques and methods to try to fix our emotions and our thoughts so we can live well, rather than, and it is a form of liberation, focusing on what do I need to do right now. In fact, the most controversial thing I could say, possibly right now, is that I do not encourage my students, seminar attendees, I do not encourage anyone to feel happy or loving or peaceful or kind or confident or courageous. I encourage people to behave that way.
Yeah. I love that word behave because when I break it down, you've got, I think Neil Donald Walsh was talking about it as be, have, do. And he's just, it was a lovely book, but I remember taking the word behave and just go be, have. So you got to be that person to have that experience. So how would I behave to be and have that now? So
Yeah.
I love like breaking these little words down, and I love I was temporarily inspired by the way of the peaceful warrior to use your pun on words,
Yeah.
and then I was like applying a lot of the things that was congruent in my own experience when I had a car crash and I had to wake up.
Uh-huh.
And I walked away pretty much unscathed, and so did my friend. And we were lucky that we walked away because, quite frankly, that was a complete goner. And that made me ask the right questions, which resonated with your motorbike story, albeit I wasn't in hospital. I was in hospital asking the big questions at the age of 19. And I was like, wow, okay, who am I? Why am I here? What's my purpose? Because what I'm doing is I've gone down a very ominous road that is not taking me where I want to go, and I feel deeply unfulfilled and discontent. But that's a nice wake-up call if somebody's there. But I never forget when we met in London years ago. Dan, you did this talk in London way back when. I think it was about 2005, and I just started meditating. I'd been spiritually awake for a little while because I'd had this car accident a while and I was asking some deeper questions, but now I was feeling a little bit more in tune with my soul, my body for sure, because I was working out and doing things right. And then you popped into my life and you did this one thing at this seminar. I don't know if you'll ever remember, if it's something that you did all the time. You stood up on stage in London in front of about, I don't know, 300 or 400 people, and you put your hand on this table, and this table was wobbly. And do you remember this? So for all the listeners, tuning in, Dan just got up on the stage. I remember you wearing black pants, black t-shirt, and you were like going, let me just see if this works. And you put your hand on the table, and it was a very wobbly old table, and you got up and did the most perfect handstand, held your balance, and dismounted from that wobbly table in a perfect handstand, whilst you were totally still and dismounted with such grace. And as you dismounted with grace, this was your opening thing to everybody, by the way, and you said, after you dismounted with grace, you'd gone, life is about balance. And I was like, wow, yeah, that's so true. Because even when the world around you is wobbling, if you can maintain a state of balance, you're going to be okay. And that's not only for your body, but that's also for your mind. And I think that sort of really applies to what you're saying, which is you might not feel this way, but you can act this way. So what are you going to act to do to bring a little bit more balance to your life? So I was just wondering, could you expand on that a little bit? Because I love that teaching.
I'd be happy to. Thank you, James, for reminding me of that. Yeah, it's been a kind of a thing to get people's attention. I'll often
To
do
get people's
before a
attention
talk.
when you
I'll do
show
a
them
handstand.
something, right? You show people like, hey, this is possible.
Yes, yes. And now I'm 78. I'm still doing the handstand
Are you still
occasionally.
doing the handstand? Are you still
Still,
doing
still
it?
doing it. Yeah, yeah,
Amazing, amazing.
yeah. But yes, it was a point to make. Sometimes I joke with the audience and I go, "Let's see Deepak do that."
Yeah.
But that's just a joke. Because I know Deepak and I've met Neil as well, and the different teachers. We each have our different viewpoints. But here's the thing. If someone was afraid, but they noticed a little toddler walking in the middle of a busy traffic street, cars whipping by, they might be terrified to run out into that street, possibly get hit, but they find themselves doing it. So while they're feeling terrified, they behave with courage. And in fact, we can only behave with courage when we're feeling terrified. Otherwise, it doesn't take courage. And so they're feeling one way and behaving another. And in the same way, we can, if we're feeling shy, we can still walk up to somebody and say, hello, I find you interesting, and would you like to have coffee or tea sometime? They can still do that. It may be difficult because they're feeling shy, but they can still do it. And that is, again, liberating. Someone can say a kind word while feeling irritated. Again, it's counterintuitive. It's not easy to do. But that is a liberation from emotions, from waiting for the right emotions or the right thoughts before we act. And so, in fact, I'd like to share something with your listeners.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, to progress toward your goals, please choose one of the following two methods. First, method one, find a way to quiet your mind, create empowering beliefs, raise your self-esteem, and practice positive self-talk to find your focus and affirm your power to free your emotions and visualize positive outcomes so that you can develop the confidence, to generate the courage, to find the determination, to make the commitment, to feel sufficiently motivated to do whatever it is you need to do. Maybe that's familiar to many people, that process. Or the second method, which I recommend, is you can just do it. Because life always comes down to what we do moment to moment. To someone and it's not always easy. Someone who, let's say, is an alcoholic. It's just saying stop drinking would be facile. They may need to go through a process, join AA, do all kinds of things between here and the point where they actually stop the behavior of bringing alcohol to their lips. So it comes down to that, whether it's a short process or a long one, our life will be determined by what we do over time. That emphasis on action. See, Neil, I love Neil, but his idea of beingness, I'm like a hobbit. You have to show me things. I don't understand what beingness is. Even if someone is simply sitting in meditation, they are doing something active. They are focusing, they are attending to the thoughts, the passing emotions, letting it go, focusing on the breath. People in meditation are actively doing something when it appears they're just being. So I don't know what just being is. Maybe it's existing, but wordplay is fun, but it has to match reality.
Yeah.
And it comes down to what we do, and there's no way to get off that hook. Now, we're only responsible for what we have control over. If there were a storm outside, you or I wouldn't be responsible for the storm because we can't control the weather. If we could, then we'd have some responsibility. So if people start to realize that they don't have any actual ability or control by their will over what emotions they're feeling in any given moment, or what thoughts pop into their awareness. Thoughts happen to us. We don't say, I think I'll think this thought next. Random thoughts just come into our mind. And so we're not responsible for the thoughts that appear in our awareness. We're not responsible for what we're feeling. We are responsible for the one thing we can control, which is our behavior.
And our response.
And our response to what happens.
Response, exactly. I remember before when I used to drink a lot, drink heavily, I was like, I've got to get out of this loop of lunacy that I put myself in. And my listeners probably heard this story many times, but it's quite nice to be reminded of, because what I did was like, I saw 3 signs to learn how to meditate inside of 1 week. I mean, I'm just grateful I saw these 3 signals, and I had the awareness to go, hey, these are 3 things telling me, for the first time in my life, follow this, James, follow it. And so I began a TM, Transcendental Meditation technique, which I learned over a course of a weekend. And within 4 months, I completely stopped drinking naturally. And I changed my diet naturally to a plant-based diet. So I became vegetarian. And yeah, sure, I could feel my body was wanting this. I'm not saying this is for everybody, but this is just how I broke free of that addiction. I broke free of the beingness that I was before, and it was taking that action that was inspired, and it happened naturally as an offset. I'm a firm believer that success is just a series of good choices that you make. And, luck and good fortune just comes from a series of making lots of little good choices. And I think that you clarify that quite nicely in Way of the Peaceful Warrior, and actually in some of your other work, which I loved, was, talking about the spiritual laws and the natural laws. So I'd love you to expand on a couple of things for like some of the audience, if you could, of like some of the natural laws that you think people should really pay attention to. Just go, because people don't necessarily say it. We've talked about action, and you talked about law of action in one of your books. But is there anything else that you'd think, hey, people really need to listen to this because they may oversee it if they're struggling with purpose or direction?
Sure. We can loop back to balance, because I actually didn't address that question directly. And let me say that we're hardwired differently.
Yeah.
I've come to recognize each of us has our own process. There are some people, for example, that when I was teaching gymnastics, learn a back somersault quicker than others.
Yeah.
But I also noticed that those who take longer to learn it often learn it better than those who learn it faster. So each of us needs to respect our way of learning and our way of living. So each of us is different. I wish I could say change to a plant-based diet, which I more or less have myself. I'm still vegetarian, my wife and I, for 50 years now. And I learned TM as well, way back when. It's like the McDonald's of consciousness.
Yes.
Accessible to everybody. It's a beautiful method, a lovely method of meditation, mantra meditation. But in your case, that worked. I wish I could tell everybody, just if you have a drinking problem, meditate and eat vegetarian, and you won't have it. But it's different for different people, of course, and you acknowledge that in your
Totally.
case.
And I would always say, I've always been totally non-pushy to everybody. My whole family is very different, very different lifestyle to me. Even my friends, to a certain extent, they're like, James, what are you doing? It's like, yeah, I've just started meditating. I've let go of a lot of these habits that don't serve me any well. It's like my life kind of depended on it, but I'm not pushing it on you. I don't want you to do it. This is just kind of what's working for me. And I feel that there's a great liberation being able to own it for yourself, even though it's going to be completely different for everybody. And I recognize that. And I was like, look, this is just the way of James. You say the way of the peaceful, or I'm like, this is way of the James. And this is just how he's rolling right now. And they go, are you going to drink again or not? Maybe. Don't know. Are you going to eat meat again? Maybe. I don't know. I was just like, you can eat fish? Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
So I just leave it there, and 20 years later, maybe, I don't know. We'll see.
Well, I like that, and that I don't know is a beginner's mind. It's an open curiosity to what life brings us, and one of the tenets of this approach to living that I teach is that there's no best book, no best teacher, no best philosophy or religion or diet or system of exercise. There's only the best for each of us at a given time of our life. Life is an experiment. We have to find out what works for us. So, but in terms of these spiritual laws and the law of balance, which is the first law in my little book called The Laws of
I
Spirit.
really love this book, guys. So I'll make sure you've got a link to it. This is one that seems a little off-piste for most of Dan's 18 books, but it's actually one of my favorite.
Yeah.
Because it's got such depth and content that you can use every single day. So I have it playing in the car from time to time. So I enjoy it. But anyway, tell us about it.
Well, the law of balance can be applied physically. In fact, it can help us to cut our time of learning in half, learning any physical skill. And the way the law of balance it can be stated is that anything we do, we can overdo or underdo. Some people talk a little too fast, others a little too slow. It's hard for people to follow them. Some people eat fast, some people eat slow. There's no one balance for everybody. Like, what is balanced exercise? Well, it depends if you're going for training for the Olympics or just want to be able to walk up a flight of stairs without getting winded. So we each have to find our own balance. But that principle, the way it works is most of us tend to undercompensate because when we're used to doing it one way, whether it's talking too fast, eating too fast, whatever, that feels normal to us. So it feels strange to change that. So we tend to undercompensate. And the example I give is if you were learning to hit a cricket ball or a baseball, depending on what culture you're from, and you kept missing because you were a little child, let's say, you're just learning, but then somebody notices that you swing on one side, or let's say in baseball, you swing too low every time. You keep missing the ball because you swing below it. You might want to tell the child, swing higher. But they will undercompensate. They'll swing a little higher, a little higher. Finally, they may hit a pop-up fly. But if you were to tell that child, make sure you miss it the next 5 times, but make sure you swing too high. In trying to swing too high, they're probably going to connect with the ball much quicker. If they shoot in basketball, if they shoot and they notice they shoot, mostly they miss the hoop to the left. Then they, instead of trying to correct and shoot for the basket, shoot too far to the right.
Yeah.
In archery, if you shoot high and to the left, shoot low and to the right the next one. So by working both sides, we find center. And that applies to anything in life. Working both sides. That's how you actually apply the law. It's not just abstract thinking or ideas or theories. It's something you can apply in everyday life. And this, as you know, from the Laws of Spirit, that little book, this ageless woman sage teaches me these laws. We're up in the mountains doing different things. And that's how I really anchor them in, how they can be applied in everyday life. So that, I hope, addresses this question of balance.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more thing that people can do, if they're not doing the sport. Like, next time you're out in nature, get a stone and try and hit a tree. And you'll know where the stone is going, and then just completely go on the other side, and then you'll see what Dan's talking about. And I love to do this exercise just to keep reminding myself if I'm in balance or out of balance, because we're always out of balance, perhaps in some area every day. Every day you might be out of balance. Today I was feeling a little low on energy. I've been traveling, I've been doing this, that, and the other, lots of work, lots of interviews, speaking to clients, and it's been great. But then I found my energy a bit low. So I was like, you got to take a nap, James. Take a nap, slow right down. And then I was like, right, I've had a nap, I feel great. Now you need to pump some blood through your heart. Off you go for a run. So I went and did sprint training up and down a hill. Came back, I was like, wow, I am back. Again, this is just applying that balance that Dan is talking about. And only you can tell, like the audience, only you guys can tell what you need to do. in order to stay in balance. And I love Dan's application and just being reminded of the law of balance. I mean, it's so powerful. So your teachings of like practical wisdom, is there any other spiritual insights that you'd love to share, or something practical, another physical exercise other than balance that you think, wow, people should really, could, not should, but could be aware of, that maybe some people don't think of, that would really help them enjoy a great quality of life?
I hope your listeners appreciated that what you just said, not should, but could, because it would be very useful for all of us to change the word should. You should be this way, I should be this way, to I could be this way. It's much less judgmental, and it's more realistic as well, because most of us, we think we know how life should be, but we really don't. It's unfolding in a sense of mystery, it's evolving. So we need to trust our process. And even though I hinted at it before, giving that example of learning a somersault, that we have to respect our own way of learning and living, speaking to young people today, many of them are depressed because they're looking on social media and everyone else seems happier than them. The people they see, their pictures, they're showing their best self. They seem to be having more fun or traveling more and that sort of thing. And that comes from comparing ourselves to other people. It's a profound disrespect for our own self. Someone, Sir Walter Raleigh once said, I cannot write a book commensurate with Shakespeare, but I can write a book by me. Mm. And so each of us has to recognize our story is our treasure. Our own story, our life, it's like a novel being written. And we don't know what the next chapter is going to be. You certainly didn't.
No, I didn't.
At these various points in your life.
No, and you know, Dan, one thing that I really appreciate about you, you know, like conversing with you before you came on the show, before when we were like writing to one another, me being in Spain and you being in Brooklyn, you always wrote at the end, until then becomes now. Tell me.
And now it's now.
And now it's now, right? So tell everybody a little bit about that, because I think that was a really beautiful way of understanding life.
Sure.
And I think that, you know, you this is why I really appreciate you and appreciate your journey and appreciate your story and appreciate your last book, that I think the audience will massively appreciate well. But I just really like to just bring that home for people. Until then becomes now. Tell us about what you mean by that. I know what that means, but it's quite nice to hear it from you, because I never heard anyone said that before. And when you wrote that on every single one,
well, that's
except for the thumbs up on the other one, and I was like, oh, I really like the way Dan's saying that, because it's fun, it's truthful, and it's got a depth of wisdom that is like, yeah, that's so right.
That's a Millman original, I suppose.
A Millman original, you can take
that. And it comes from the realization, you know, most people roll their eyes when they hear about living in the present moment. Yeah. Because we, you know, we've read Be Here Now, Ram Dass, we've Power of Now, we read my book, it talks, you know, goes into the present moment. But there's many realizations I've had since then. Any physicist will tell you, you cannot grasp the present moment. Because if I say the word now, from the time I intoned the n sound to the ow sound, 1,000,000 nanoseconds have gone by. Which nanosecond is now? So when teachers like me suggest attending to the present moment, we're really saying, handle what's in front of you. And the way time works, it's a paradox, because time seems real to most of us, and in the conventional world, it is real. We set up a time to link up here for our conversation. So time is a functional thing. We know we're going to be doing something this evening, perhaps, or tomorrow. And yet, from a transcendental view, there is no time. And here's an example. Let's say I was sitting on the shore of a river, and you were in a boat, and you're meditating. You're doing your TM in a boat, and you're sitting very still, and you're coming down from what appears to be the past, passing in front of me, what appears to be the present, and then moving on in that river of time into the future. But from your perspective, you are sitting in the eternal present moment, absolutely still. And so that's the paradox of time. Conventionally speaking, it's real, but transcendentally speaking, it's an illusion. All we have is the present moment, the present moment, the present moment. So when I write until then becomes now, well, until then, we've all heard that phrase, but it will become now. And here we are in this now and now. Life is like a motion picture with many frames. One frame, another frame, another frame. They all come in front of us in the present moment. That's all we have. What we call the past doesn't exist anymore, except in the neural impulses in our brain we call memory. And if someone said to me, but wait, Dan, I know the past exists. Here's a picture of my 5th birthday party. Well, all that's actually happening in that moment is someone is showing me a photographic image of a memory. But it's happening in this present moment. Past is past. And the future is our imagination. We can get up and we have the ability to plan our day, to say, oh, I have to run this errand, then we run that errand. But memory is not so accurate as we've learned. And what we imagined happening that day, if we wrote down everything we think is going to happen and at what time, it changes. It simply does. So we don't want to become too attached to the plans. Yes. So memory and imagination are wonderful human capacities, but we are often lost in the past and future. And if we want to quiet our mind, the best way to do it is focus on what's happening right now. If we were sitting in the same room right now, James, and I tossed you my keys and said, catch, you'd reach for them with a cat-like awareness. You would not be thinking about what happened yesterday or what's going to go, you're going to do tomorrow. You would be pure awareness. In the present moment, there is only awareness. When we're thinking about anything, it's from the past or the future. So by focusing on what's in front of us, that's our moment of sanity, that's our moment of power, that's our moment of reality, right now.
So you said something that I really liked in that. It was like, don't be attached to certain things. But at the same time, you know, like when people are, you know, struggling to find their purpose and direction, they're trying to attach to their purpose and direction. So how can we find orientation, or how does one find orientation in that? And by the way, I've written all these questions down, and I'm just thinking my own questions instead of
Yeah, that's great. That's why I like these
so here I am with you, and I'm like going, well, this is James. This isn't, you know, stuff that I'd really, oh yeah, let me ask Dan this. I was like, well, actually, these questions are gone right out the window.
Well, feel free anyway.
Yeah.
But taking that up, that idea, we can have an aspiration in this present moment. In fact, one of my books, another small book like The Laws of Spirit, it's called The 4 Purposes of Life. And you know, when I was writing that book, James, a friend of mine said, I don't need to read your book, Dan. He said, I know the purpose of life. It's learning to love. I mean, whatever the question, love is the answer. And I went, well, that's a good purpose. And another friend said, no, the purpose is realization, enlightenment. And I went, well, that's really a good purpose too for humanity. But another friend said, no, that's all philosophy. He said, our purpose is reproducing, keeping the species going. You know, so they were all right. They were all correct. But just as we divide the days of the year into 4 seasons, or the points on a compass into 4 primary directions, by looking at our life through 4 purposes, it helps make more sense out of it. Now, I'm not going to go into that right now. I'm just going to say the first purpose is learning life's lessons. And there's a lot more to that. 12 courses in the School of Life and so on. But the next one is our career or calling. Sometimes they're the same, like in my case, maybe in yours, but sometimes they're separate, which is fine. We have a career that makes an income, and then we have a calling, or mission or hobby, whatever it is, that we love to do in our spare time. The third purpose is a more mysterious one. I don't know if you've read my book, The Life You Were Born to Live.
Yeah, is that the one with all the life path numbers? The
life path numbers, right. But
I'm intrigued to know what number you are. What number are you?
Mine's 268. It describes my life path. And I could say a lot more. I mean, we could do a whole hour just on that life path material. But it's my second most popular book. It has been over the years.
Maybe we do another show on that, Dan, because, you know, I think that people would really love to know about that, but because there's so much depth in that.
Yeah. Well, in the meantime, let me just say that anyone can go to my website, peacefulwarrior.com, and look at the life purpose find your life purpose, and there'll be a calculator that can put in their date of birth, and they might see a sample, a taste of some core issues of their life. And there's much more, of course. It deals with relationships, finances, health, and so on. And so it's an extensive system, and again, it's been read by well over 1 million people, maybe 2.
And it's kind of scarily accurate.
Yeah, it is. It's quite accurate. I don't know exactly how it works. I can't say how adding up the numbers of one's date of birth can give valid, reliable, accurate information, but it seems to work. And there are many numerology systems, and none of them make any sense really, and yet it can be very useful as a tool. But the reason I mentioned the 4 purposes is the 4th purpose brings us back.
The first one was so let's just go to recap this quickly.
Learning life's lessons.
Learning life's lessons. Number 2 was career. Number 3 was
Iron calling, and number 3 is the life purpose, the life path system.
Yeah, and then
that's another kind of life purpose, another approach.
Right.
But the 4th purpose is perhaps the most important and the most manageable, because we may not know our cosmic purpose ultimately, but we always know our purpose in the present moment. Like, for example, I know my purpose is very clear in this moment, sharing with you. And your purpose is very clear. And your listeners in this moment, their purpose is clear. So we always know our purpose in that moment. Otherwise, we're not living on purpose. Robert Byrne once said the purpose of life is a life of purpose. When I watched my granddaughter here in Brooklyn when she was little, crawling across the floor, she wasn't crawling just to get a workout. She wanted her big brother's toy, the sparkly toy. So that's why I say we're hardwired goal seekers. So in this moment, we can have a plan. In this moment, we can have a goal. And we just can handle, that analogy, it's everybody's heard it, but it's beautiful that we're like cars driving at night and we can only see as far as our headlight beam. But we can make the whole journey that way.
Sure.
So if we focus on our purpose in each moment, we're living a purposeful life, and that can lead to progress toward our goals.
Which is another way of like saying you're building, like I have this little analogy that I like to use is that as I've started the podcast, 5 years ago in November, I will say something like that. And I remember just thinking, well, I've got to begin. I don't know how to begin, but I have this calling. I've had this calling for a long time and I've not listened. So I was like, right, James, how many times does it take for you to really listen? I feel like my inner guidance was saying, you got to do this. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do this because I don't want to share this information. And my inner being was, well, you're going to share it because you have a gift. And I'm like, well, why me? Why does the world need another coach? Why does it need another teacher? I was like, well, you have a way of explaining it like nobody else. Because your story, this is what you were alluding to at the beginning, Dan, which I really appreciate. And I hope someone in the audience or all of you take this, is your story is your treasure map.
Right. Because there's not a single story on the planet exactly like yours or mine or any of your listeners. That is our treasure.
Yeah.
And yes, it does take a certain hubris, but also an inner calling to share with other people. Andre Gide once said, everything that needs to be said has already been said, but it needs to be said again because no one was really paying attention.
Yeah, I remember.
So
That's a beautiful analogy, right?
Each of us has our own way of expressing our own wisdom and sharing it with others.
So if one is listening, someone's listening in and they're going, wow, what's my purpose and direction? Well, your purpose and your direction, if you're listening to what Dan is sharing, is like unfolding your own story, having a look at your own story and noticing some of the mistakes you've made and how you've come back from that, and using that to uplift other people in some way will then sort of give you the headlights about the next step, and then the next step, and then the next step.
And to trust that.
Yeah.
To trust that.
Can I ask
rather than the fear of missing out and other people are getting it and I'm missing out somehow. Nobody is missing anything. As somebody once said, everyone has the best seat. I think it was John Coltrane, a musician, said everybody has the best seat in their own life.
which is the front seat.
the front seat. And somebody else once said, um, be yourself because everyone else is already taken.
I love that one. That
Yeah.
one. And something that I really liked that you said at the beginning, Dan, was you said, I think it's Theodore Roosevelt said that, is that, you know, particularly some of the young listeners listening in, because I like to feel like I'm a bridge between, you know, different levels of demographics. And you said that comparison is the thief of joy. And I think it was Theodore Roosevelt who said that, somebody like that.
Yeah.
And I remember, you know, like it is true. It's like we all do compare, particularly when you're younger. But when you realize that, you know, your mistakes and you're sitting in the front seat of your own life. And although life challenges may be coming onto your lap without your permission, sometimes you just realize it's going to serve you really well as you pass through, as that storm passes through. And I can say that from one of, you know, several of my own challenges that I've gone through. And as you know, go into your book and your stories, you're like, oh, I've gone through this, and this, and here I am. And you become a lot more open to life. And I guess my last question that I wanted to really ask you today was just about trust, because I think a lot of people find trusting in something greater, trusting life, trusting the universe, trusting your inner guidance, you know, that it's going to take you in a direction, because some people feel like they don't have control. So how does that trust bring back that sense of control what you can from your perspective? Because I really love the way you put it, Dan.
Right. Well, here's how I would put it. I view daily life as a form of spiritual weight training. If
That's
we
a
don't,
really just already, that's just like bang, have some of that.
if we don't lift enough weights, we don't get any stronger. Now, I do not recommend fractures
No.
as a method of
40
spiritual
places
growth.
in the leg, no.
No, I do not. We don't have to suffer in order to grow. However, many of us have noticed that lessons repeat themselves until we learn them. And if we don't learn the easy lessons, they get more dramatic to get our attention. So we can see daily life as a school, our classroom. And in fact, daily life is guaranteed to teach us everything we need to learn to evolve as a human being. People were evolving before books and before seminars. But sometimes people say, well, Dan, why do you write books and teach seminars? Because a good book or seminar or any communication can remind us of some things and help us to learn more easily, more gracefully, the lessons of everyday life. But our daily lives, we need to start to trust that. Adversity is a part of life. In fact, sometimes I ask audiences, raise your hand if you've ever experienced physical, emotional, or mental pain in your life. And all the hands go up.
Yeah.
And I go, well, keep your hands up if you've, well, that's a whole other thing. But most people can appreciate that they're a little wiser and a little stronger for having gone through that difficulty. Sometimes digging our way out of a dark hole can give us the strength to climb the mountain. That seems apparent in your case.
Yeah. One thing I just wanted to sort of leave on a high was something that I took an idea that you said once, and I hope the audience can take loads of little ideas that Dan and I have shared today. But I really love Dan's take on do the physical stuff to get the real understanding. You know, so when you were showing the balance, like you showed the balance of doing the handstand because of your experience on a wobbly table. And that to me just shows you can be centered in a wobbly life experience. And one thing that I chose to do shortly after we met was I decided that I'm going to go and do a skydiving course. So I went and did a skydiving course. And the purpose of me doing that was number one, because I thought it would be fun. But number two, I thought it'd scare the living daylights out of myself as well. Because the mind would say no, but the body's actually going to go, sorry, the body says no, but the mind's going to go, I'm going anyway. So a friend of mine and I came over from Hong Kong. We went and did this like free fall university thing several years ago. And we were both petrified doing it, but we were like, we've got to do this. And the reason why we were doing it, well, at least my case, I can't speak for him other than he thought it would be fun, was because in my mind, I thought if I can land out of a plane pulling my own cord many times, then I can pretty much do anything I put my mind to.
Mhm.
Now, you didn't talk about that, but this was an idea that James suddenly thought, well, this would be a good idea.
Yeah.
And so it didn't matter what I set my mind on. It was like, I will stand and do a long-term goal. And it doesn't matter how long it takes. So in my case, one of my missions is I want to help 1 billion people with enjoying a greater, healthy life, happier life, wealthier life, and greater fulfillment. Time doesn't matter how long time it takes.
Right.
So I've started. So it was like, right, I put my mind to it. I know I can do it. I've jumped out of an airplane. I'm still here. I survived a car crash. I survived alcoholism. And here I am, still chipping away brick by brick. And I just love the way you put it on, just turn up your action. What are you doing? Because that's the only thing you've really got control on when you're moving towards your purpose.
Spiritual life begins on the ground, rooted like a tree. A tree can't grow branches and leaves and extend to the sky until they put in deep roots. So I do believe in physically grounded physical training. Enlightenment may be a bodily experience. And it may be that meditation, sitting in meditation, doesn't just quiet the mind. Maybe it quiets the body. And when the body is still, the mind tends to follow. So I believe that our practice is physically grounded in the way we approach everyday life. A man wrote to me soon after Way of the Peaceful Warrior came out. And he read it and he said, Dan, now I really am interested in spiritual practice, but I have a wife, 3 children, and a full-time job. How can I find the time? And he came to understand that his wife, his children, his full-time work were his primary spiritual practices.
Yeah.
And they will demand more and develop us more than sitting in a cave and meditating. I know because I've done both.
Okay. I did one Christmas, instead of going to my family who were living in Sweden at the time, instead of going to see them, I said, I'm going to meditate this Christmas. I remember this, right?
Yeah.
And I sat there and I was like, okay, I'm bored now. I'm bored. I was like, okay, I've meditated now. I've not gone to see my family. I've stayed in England, which is where I was living at the time. And I've missed out on that 2 weeks of being with my family, celebrating, because I want to sit and meditate. And I was like, I won't do that again. So I never did it again. But I had the experience.
You
And
had
that
the
to me,
experience. You learned the lesson, right?
learned the lesson, which is, being around people can sometimes be a really beautiful thing.
Yeah. Well, Ram Dass also said, you think you're enlightened? Go visit your family.
Yeah, yeah. And
So
also,
it's a
yeah,
training in
it's
itself. Yeah.
training, yeah. And now like I have a really great relationship with my family because I don't judge them. I try not to judge them. And I know that you're different from me, but I love you as you are, not as the way I want you to be, but just as you are. And I found that that gave me a lot of peace. If we look back to your new book, Peaceful Heart, that gave me a peaceful heart thinking that way. And the warrior spirit is I don't need to change you.
Yeah. And that brings up the whole idea of peaceful warrior. People often ask me, well, where did you come up with that term? And actually, I was teaching a martial arts course at Oberlin back when, and based on my experience with Aikido and Tai Chi. And so part of the course was Aikido and part was Tai Chi. And
The
then
one
I
was
was going to
Japanese, one was Chinese, but both from the Orient, right?
exactly, both from Asia, and they have a certain approach. And I was going to call it for the school catalog, The Way of the Warrior. But then I went, that doesn't quite fit because both of these are receptive martial arts. They're not aggressive martial arts. And I said, and then I had a light bulb moment. I went, why don't I call it The Way of the Peaceful Warrior?
Yeah.
And that's when the term first came up. But the reason that term applies to every one of your listeners, and you and me, it's not some exclusive club. We're all peaceful warriors in training because all of us are seeking to live with a peaceful heart, with more serene, heart, more equanimity in the midst of the chaos of the everyday news.
Yeah.
And as you acknowledge, there are times we need a warrior spirit just to roll up our sleeves and march into life and deal with the challenges that naturally arise in everyday life as a form of spiritual weight training.
Yeah, I really like that. You know, for people who think that you don't know if they're on a spiritual course or a spiritual awakening or whatever, don't worry, you are, because that's what's
Exactly.
happening, and
Exactly.
you're just on it, whether you like it or not. You know, Dan, it's been a real joy speaking with you. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. This week's Super Soul model is Dan Millman. Thank you, Dan.
You're very welcome. Thank you.